Mark Dombroff is a former trial attorney for the FAA. Mark, what do you think of this idea? Privatize the darn thing, and it does take a while to do that, but what do you think of that option?
Well, I think in many respects, Neil, we're talking about going back to the future. If you recall, prior to 9/11, airport security was the responsibility, or passenger security was the responsibility of the airlines at each airport, and they together hired a single security company, and this was true throughout the United States. There were multiple security companies at different airports. Once 9/11 occurred, the TSA was created. So now we're, in a sense, coming full cycle, and because of the problems we're experiencing, the talk is back to the privatization. We've got privatization at about 20 airports throughout the United States currently. But I think the problem is fundamentally much more than the long lines. I think the TSA has become a behemoth bureaucratic organization, and I think there really has to be some fundamental changes in it if it's going to continue in the role of providing security for us.
You know what I noticed, Mark, just traveling a great deal myself, is that there's no consistency to the TSA. In some cities and locales, top-notch, and others, you know, less than reliable. Rules that we thought applied nationally about taking certain things out of your bag don't apply in all sites at all times. So I think it's gotten so big, so unwieldy, that even keeping to a basic set of guidelines has been lost. So I don't know whether more officers are the answer, leaving aside the privatization option, but just better officers. What do you think?
I think that's part of it, Neil. I think you're exactly right. And I'm not sure that consistency from airport to airport is necessarily the answer, only because one size does not fit all. The airports have different configurations. They have different numbers of passengers. They have different rush hours depending upon which airport it is. But I do think there have got to be fundamental rules and standards put in place. If we look at the FAA in terms of their oversight regulation of the aviation industry in terms of safety, one, we have the safest airline system in the world in the United States. But the FAA doesn't fly on every airplane. It doesn't fly the airplanes. What it does is it has fundamental rules in place that it views as minimum standards, and then it expects the airlines to implement those rules. And in fact, in almost all instances, the airlines go beyond those rules. And they've got inspectors out there who inspect to make sure that the airlines are doing their job. Yeah. The result is the safest system in the world. The question that I would ask is, why don't we do the same thing in the context of airport security?
Not a bad idea, almost too logical. But I do want to pick your brain a little bit on the inconsistent reports we get on disasters. That shouldn't strike us as surprising. But just as, for example, Egypt Air is saying, for example, debris has been sighted on the eastern Mediterranean. We have planes flying overhead, the Pentagon saying some Navy P-3s over the region, and they can detect they can see nothing, even resembling debris. And what worries me about that, I'm not meaning to fault the Egyptians, or for that matter, support what our guys are saying. But we're not getting consistent info. And I'm wondering if that is complicating matters when we can't even agree on a site, debris, because that's after the fact, right?
Well, that's absolutely true, and I think you're raising the Egypt Air tragedy is a really good example. One, just as a footnote, I can't help but observe that we're really seeing, in many respects, to this point in time, a carbon copy of Malaysia 370 with multiple countries involved, and it appears there's sort of some tension about jurisdictional limits. We have reports of turns and inexplicable flight paths. We have sightings of debris, and I could be talking about Malaysia 370. There's a lot of politics involved. I think our history, the U.S. history involving Egypt and Egypt Air 990, where our NTSB concluded that it was suicide, and the Egyptian authorities completely rejected that and issued their own report. Yeah. I think that what we are seeing here is geopolitics on an international level. And while everybody seems to be moving towards the terrorism explosion explanation of some sort, whether it originated on the airplane or elsewhere, we really have absolutely no evidence. So, you know, it's speculation once again, as it was in the early stages of Malaysia 370. And I hesitate to say it again, Neil, but in the context of Egypt Air, it's back to the future once again when we look at Malaysia 370.
Especially, as you say, with so many countries involved. Thank you very, very much, Mark. Good catching up with you again.
Thank you, Neil.